Hello, welcome back to another episode of CantoSense. We are here embracing Chinese culture for Christian living. Chinese people are nothing if not industrious. You know, they say you can find Chinese people anywhere because you can start a business anywhere. And so, where you can start a business, you will find Chinese people. We are very hardworking people to the point sometimes to our own detriment. It's common in the news, and it was common in a company I worked for where someone literally worked to death. They basically just worked 48 hours straight to meet a deadline and then collapsed at their desk of exhaustion and passed away. And this is, of course, not an isolated incident. So, our hardworkingness can be a blessing, but sometimes it can be a curse. And where it really becomes a curse is where we start valuing people according to their productivity. How much are they performing? How much are they producing? Is their performance good? And it's not even just evaluating the performance, it comes down to attaching the value of a human being with their output. And we see this play it out in not just the workplace, but even in the way the Chinese language is used, in the way we view people or people who are of lesser ability.
Old people, because they have dementia and they're no longer productive to the society. The children would take them on a so-called holiday and would abandon them overseas because they're seen as a burden and as a liability. Same thing with parents who are expecting a child, where pregnancies are terminated because if the baby is born with a disability, they're seen as non-productive and therefore in a way of no worth and no value. This is significant for us to think about because as cultural Chinese and as followers of Jesus, this way of thinking and valuing people is so ingrained in our worldview and in our culture that sometimes we do it unconsciously. It is important for us to consider this against a biblical worldview.
Today, we are again just grateful for a guest to be joining us to think through what personhood looks like in the Chinese culture and then also in the biblical worldview. Welcome back, Dr. Eliza Liam. We're so glad that you're here with us. Our dear friend, Dr. Eliza, is a trained psychologist, part of a group practice.
I remember growing up, one of the ways where my mom would scold me if, as a form of chastising me is, you are of no use, mo yong, as the Cantonese would say it. How can we intentionally and practically resist this way of valuing people?
I think I have to bring us back to the Sabbath, um, and God's resting and God's being, and God instituting that for us. He is holy and He has made us to be holy so that we can be with Him. And the Sabbath is about setting aside work, it's about setting aside our preoccupations, it's setting aside all the normal things, just being with God. And especially now, I think that we are so fixated on our screens because of the work that we are doing. There is no end to it. We need to be intentional about not being productive. I think about my mom, who is advancing with her dementia, and how much time it takes just to sit with her and help her read through a passage of scripture. She's really, really struggling. And so when I do that, I help my family understand that she is well worth it. She is, with all of her limitations and her disability, the time that I spend with her is precious. And so I think I help them see that, we don't ignore someone when they are not well, when they have a problem, when they are sick. So that's part of acknowledging the fact that part of our personhood is in this fallen world, um, difficult to deal with. And so we make space for that. We make room for that when we honor our parents and we honor the aged and we continue to care for them.
Even though we may not be able to necessarily contribute to society, we are valuable because we're being made in the image of God and we have value just because of that. It is not easy when you are constantly bombarded by messages that tell you that you measured according to how much money you have, your career, how young you are. How can we intentionally live counter to this kind of cultural messages.
One of the things that we can do is we can really help our kids be more sensitive to the people around them. I'll ask my son things like, do you notice who in your class doesn't have a friend? Do you notice people who have no one to eat with at recess time or lunchtime? When you're picking your teams, who gets left out? No, who gets bullied? Who gets teased a lot or gets in trouble a lot in your class? So I do ask him those kinds of questions because I want him to be aware of people around. He becomes an instrument for helping these kids connect. I say then it's up to you, isn't it? You can include him or you can invite him along. The other thing that comes to mind for me is looking into scripture and noticing the people that Jesus noticed.
Mm.
The blind man who was calling out for him that the crowds were dismissing, the woman who was unclean and touched his garment. He seemed to have a way of noticing the people that everybody wanted to sideline, like the tax collector up in the tree. My husband is one of those people who will take note of the cleaners at our condo. And he will greet them. He'll take time to greet them. He'll take time to keep the lift doors open for them. We try to learn the names of our security guards. He has conversations with the gardener. And so we tell these stories to our children and we talk about our deep interest in other people. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they serve us or they keep our place beautiful or safe or whatever. It has the fact to do, they are there and so we pay attention to them. I think it's very important to not treat people like they're invisible. The eye contact that we make with the cashier, acknowledging her personhood, saying thank you to the waiter who refills your cup. Those are little ways that helps the child understand that, yeah, we are to take notice of people around us and not to see them as means to our end.
I think in Asia, this is probably more prevalent because it is a hierarchical culture where it's always very clear who's the boss or who's the person doing the work, who's the person who's not doing the work. And those roles and levels are very clear. It is really countercultural. The other thing that I think is countercultural is to note language. Words carry a lot of weight. And words reflect a culture and the way that we talk to each other, the tone, the things we say, the things we don't say, tell us how we feel about each other. Speaking Cantonese my whole life and now living in Hong Kong, the things that I hear, because I do understand the language, that Cantonese and possibly other dialects, I speak Mandarin too, so it's a little bit like that as well, but I can definitely vouch for Cantonese being sometimes quite a harsh language or a harsh dialect. Like I Ching gave the example of mo yong or you're of no use, there are words, obviously not the whole dialect, but there are words within the dialect that are used to be quite degrading, just putting down not even just the way the person's behaving, but who they are, the essence of the person. And so I don't know, in your experience, is there any advice for just working against those cultural grains in how we communicate and speak and view each other?
We have to be so mindful of the labels that we are using. I remember growing up listening to how harsh my grandmother was and listening to her, the way she spoke. I think I understand the way my mom grew up
Hmm.
as a result of that. And understanding the way my mom grew up, I understand how I was brought up myself. So, having that awareness, I've been really trying very hard to be mindful of the things that I say, my tone with my own children. But it's in us, and it's really hard to catch ourselves when we're in that heat of the moment. So I think the other thing that we really need to be able to do is learn to recover, and learn to say sorry, and learn to say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say that. Or that was rude. Or that was unkind. Or that was painful. And so I'm learning that yes, I have to say sorry to my children a lot because of the stuff that just comes right out. And that models for them how to recover. So one of the things I've tried to do is I'm trying to write notes. Uh, like I'm trying to be very literal about the labels I want to use with my son, for example, right? Writing, noticing his strengths and noticing the things, the ways that I want to encourage him. so that I actually have kind of a vocabulary for it. But that's very intentional. That's kind of like swimming against our own
Mm,
uh, upbringing, isn't it?
definitely.
When I first moved to Singapore, I met some people in the communications industry, and the guy came up to me, and when he found out that I was a trained psychologist, I had my PhD, he said to me, I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Oh, we could use you." And my mouth just dropped open because I'm thinking, am I a screwdriver? What am I? It's like we can say, wow, I could see where your gifts could come in, or I could see where you can contribute if you want to. Because we use a knife, we use a broom, we use an implement, but not people.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Eliza, for joining us once again. As usual, your wisdom helps us shed light on these really complicated tensions within our culture as we live it out through our faith. And so,
As a follower of Jesus and as a cultural Chinese, we have to really pay attention and be intentional in living counterculturally. We talk about redeeming the culture, and yes, that is very important. But at the same time, there will be aspects of our culture that we will need to resist and reject. And I think this is an instance where we need to really pay attention to how we value a person. And a lot of what Dr. Eliza has talked about is going to be a challenge for us, but I don't think that it's impossible with the help of God.
everything that was shared today is so countercultural that I think when we share the good news and also disciple people within the Christian faith, this will be quite jarring for cultural Chinese, especially new believers. Thank you for joining us, and we certainly hope to see you again soon.